Hi, welcome to another video. So, today, I want to talk about Nvidia Nemotron 3 Super. It's free to try API access, how you can actually use it in coding tools like Kilo CLI and OpenCode, and also some of the biggest things that Nvidia launched at GTC 2026 on March 16th, 2026. Also, this video is sponsored by Nvidia. Now, whenever a company sponsors a video, I think the most useful thing to do is to focus on what actually matters to us as users. So, I'm going to keep this practical and mainly talk about where Nemotron Super fits, what it is good at, and how you can wire it into real workflows instead of just reading benchmark slides. So, before we come to Nemotron Super itself, let me quickly talk about the newly launched stuff from the Nvidia GTC keynote, because that gives a lot of context as to what Nvidia is actually trying to build here. The biggest infrastructure announcement was the Vera Rubin platform. Nvidia said this is opening the next frontier of Agentic AI, and it combines the Vera CPU, the Rubin GPU, NVLink 6, ConnectX 9, Bluefield 4, Spectrum 6, and even the newly integrated Grok 3 LPU into one giant AI supercomputer-style platform. The bigger point here is not just that it is fast, it is that Nvidia is clearly optimizing entire AI factories for pre-training, post-training, reinforcement learning, and real-time agentic inference altogether. So, that is a really big shift. They also launched Dynamo 1.0, which is open-source inference software for AI factories. Nvidia is basically calling it an operating system for inference at scale. And this is important because as agentic apps become more common, raw model quality is not enough. You need routing, memory movement, scheduling, and good inference economics. Nvidia claims Dynamo can boost Blackwell inference performance by up to 7 times in some cases, which is pretty wild. Then there was NemoClaw for the OpenClaw community, and this one is honestly super interesting for developers. Nvidia says NemoClaw lets you install Nemotron models and the new OpenShell runtime in a single command, with extra privacy and security controls for always-on autonomous agents. It is meant to work from the cloud all the way down to RTX PCs, DGX Station, and DGX Spark. So, Nvidia is not just talking about models anymore. They are clearly pushing long-running agent systems as well. They also expanded their open model families in a pretty major way. Nvidia is now positioning Nemotron for agentic AI, Cosmos for physical AI, Isaac Groot for robotics, Alpamayo for autonomous driving, and BioNemo for science and healthcare. On top of that, they launched the Nematron Coalition, which is basically a collaboration with companies and labs like Cursor, LangChain, Mistral, Perplexity, Reflection, Sarvam, Thinking Machines Lab, and others to build frontier open models together. Nvidia says the first coalition model will underpin the upcoming Nemotron 4 family, which is quite great to see. So, with all of that in mind, Nemotron 3 Super starts to make much more sense. This is not just some random one-off model drop, it is part of Nvidia's broader push into open agentic AI. So, what exactly is Nemotron 3 Super? Well, it is an open, efficient mixture of experts' hybrid Mamba-Transformer model for agentic reasoning. In simple terms, it is a big open model that is specifically made to be strong at the kind of work we actually care about these days, like coding tool use, terminal use, long context reasoning, and agent workflows. The model itself is around 120 billion total parameters, but only around 12 billion active parameters are used per token. That is important because it gives you a nice balance of capability and efficiency. Nvidia's technical report says it can match or beat other open frontier models in a bunch of places while also being much faster in inference. They are claiming up to around 2.2 times higher throughput than GPT-OSS 120 billion and up to 7.5 times higher throughput than QN 3.5 122 billion in their tested setup. So, that is a pretty strong pitch for people who want open models without making inference insanely expensive. Another thing that I like here is that Nvidia is not keeping it closed. The weights are open, the training recipe is being shared, and even parts of the post-training data and supporting materials are being released. So, this is quite awesome for sure. Now, what are the real use cases? The first one is coding agents, obviously. Nvidia itself is positioning the Nemotron lineup for coding assistance, search, and complex workflow automation. And that makes sense because Nemotron 3 Super has been trained with a heavy focus on agentic capabilities. It is not just a chatbot model, it is a model that is meant to reason through steps, use tools, work through longer tasks, and deal with code and terminal-style workflows more reliably. So, if you use things like Kilo CLI, OpenCode, Rue, Cline, or any other OpenAI-compatible coding tool, Nemotron Super is the kind of model that makes sense in architect mode, planning mode, repo understanding, bug triage, code review, and bigger refactor planning. I think that is where it should shine the most. The second use case is terminal and tool use. Nvidia's own report emphasizes software engineering, terminal use, and general tool use. So if you want a model that can inspect a code base, reason through shell output, Nvidia has also been talking a lot about long-running agents and that whole ecosystem around OpenClaw and NemoClaw. So there's a bigger story here than just chatting with a model in a browser. Now, there are some downsides too. This is not a tiny local model that you casually run on any laptop. If you're looking for the cheapest, lightweight, autocomplete model, This is probably overkill. This is more for when you want a stronger open model for real agentic tasks. So take that with a grain of salt and match the model to the task. But now comes the cool part, and that is the API. You can try Nemotron 3 Super through Nvidia Build, and that is where the free-to-try API angle comes in. So you can head on over to build.nvidia.com, open the Nemotron 3 Super page, and get your API key there. This is great because it lets you try the model without doing a whole self-hosting setup from day one. The nice part is that Nvidia's API is OpenAI-compatible, so the base URL is integrate.api.nvidia.com/v1, and you use the normal chat completion style flow. That means if a tool already supports OpenAI-compatible endpoints, then generally you can just plug this in and start using it. NVIDIA's docs also show that reasoning is enabled by default, and you can turn it off if you want faster responses. I think this is actually good because for hard planning and debugging work, you probably want the reasoning on, but for simpler edits or faster iteration, you may want it off to keep things snappy. There's also one small but important detail from NVIDIA's model card. For coding agents, they recommend forcing non-empty content in the request body. That is basically to make sure tools do not get confused if the assistant message would otherwise be empty while it is doing tool calling stuff. So this is good to know if you're wiring it into an agent harness and things feel slightly weird. Now let me tell you how I would configure this in actual tools. Let's start with Kilo CLI. So in Kilo CLI or in the broader Kilo setup, you want to use the OpenAI-compatible or custom endpoint route, as you can actually configure it quite easily in both OpenCode and Kilo CLI. You just run the /connect command and then follow it by selecting the Nvidia provider there, and then enter your API key, and then select the model from the /models option. You can currently also try it out for fully free on OpenCode as well without any API key, so you can try that out as well. I generally prefer that because it is cleaner, and once that is done, you can use Nemotron Super inside OpenCode for exactly the kind of stuff OpenCode is good at, like repo exploration, shell-heavy tasks, planning, code edits, and command execution loops. Since OpenCode is very snappy and terminal native, I think this is actually a pretty nice match. You can also configure this in other tools that support OpenAI-compatible APIs, so things like Roo, Cline, or your own scripts should not be difficult. That is one of the best things here. NVIDIA is not forcing you into some weird proprietary SDK just to try the model. It works with the normal API shape, which is pretty good for sure. Now, what would I actually use Nemotron Super for in daily work? The first thing would be repo planning. Give it a larger task, let it inspect the codebase, and have it produce an implementation plan. The second thing would be code review and debugging. Since it is trained for agentic reasoning and terminal use, it should be a strong candidate for tracing failures, reading logs, and figuring out what is going wrong. The third thing would be workflow automation. If you're building internal tools, CI review bots, or automated engineering helpers, an OpenAI-compatible open model like this becomes very attractive. And the fourth one would be search and knowledge work inside developer products. NVIDIA itself is talking about coding assistance, search, and complex workflow automation, and I think that is exactly the right framing. Now, if you ask me, the bigger story here is not just one model. The bigger story is that NVIDIA is trying to build the full stack for open agentic AI. At GTC 2026 on March 16, 2026, they were not just launching chips, they were launching infrastructure with Vera Rubin, inference orchestration with Dynamo, agent runtime pieces with NemoClaw and OpenShell, and then the open model roadmap with the Nematron coalition and the expanded model families. So, Nemotron Super fits into that story as the model layer for developers who want strong open reasoning and coding capabilities without being locked into a closed ecosystem. And I think that is honestly the most interesting part. Because if this stuff keeps improving, then we get more serious open alternatives for coding agents, enterprise automation, and long-running assistance that is good for pricing, good for flexibility, and good for the ecosystem in general. Overall, I think Nemotron 3 Super is a really good option if you want an open frontier-style model for agentic work, especially if you care about coding, tool use, terminal tasks, and OpenAI-compatible integrations. The free-to-try API access makes it easy to check out, and the fact that you can plug it into things like Kilo CLI and OpenCode makes it much more practical than a lot of model releases that just sit on a leaderboard and do nothing. So yeah, this is pretty great. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.